The first thing you should know about my sister Cynthia is that she loves a stage. Any stage. It doesn't matter if it's a wedding, a funeral, or a kid's birthday party if there's a microphone. She'll find it and make sure you remember her name. So, of course, at our brother Lucas's wedding, she managed to steal the spotlight before the champagne even had time to warm. The ballroom at the Oakmont Country Club looked like something out of a bridal magazine: crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed glasses, and an army of waiters trained to glide, not walk. Every detail screamed perfect. And Cynthia, the self-proclaimed perfectionist, had planned it all. She wore a fitted silver dress that probably cost more than my car and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. When she spotted me near the head table, I saw the quick flicker of judgment in her eyes. It lasted only a second, but I caught it. I always do. She walked toward me with that fake warmth she saves for people she secretly hates. "Amelia," she said, dragging my name out like it was gum stuck to her shoe. "You actually came. I was worried you'd still be busy with, military things." I smiled, calm. Wouldn't miss it. Her gaze ran down my dress, plain navy blue with simple heels, nothing flashy. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here because Lucas asked me to. Cynthia leaned closer and whispered, "You really wore that?" Loud enough for a nearby bridesmaid to hear. The girl bit her lip, trying not to laugh. I didn't answer. Years in the service had taught me something my family never did: discipline. When someone wants a reaction, silence is the sharpest weapon you can use. The band started playing softly. The guests began finding their seats, and the air filled with the sound of champagne corks and polite laughter. From across the room, I noticed 4 men in tuxedos standing near the bar. Broad shoulders, straight posture, short haircuts. You can spot a soldier anywhere. My chest tightened for a second. I knew them. Or rather, they knew me. Turner, Diaz, Briggs, and Porter. My former team. They hadn't seen me yet, but I could tell from the way they stood. They recognized the rhythm of command in the room. Old habits die hard. Dinner began, and people toasted to love, happiness, and lifelong partnerships none of them would ever understand. Lucas and his new wife Nora looked happy, glowing under the lights. Then Cynthia decided the moment was about her again. She clinked her glass with a spoon and stood up, holding the microphone like she'd been rehearsing for a TED Talk. "I just want to say a few words," she began, pretending to blush as the crowd turned toward her. Weddings are such emotional days, especially for families. For some of us, they remind us how far we've come, and how far some of us still have to go. A few polite chuckles rolled through the tables. She continued, eyes scanning the room until they landed right on me. "And my sister Amelia, well, she's never been one for parties or appearances, but we're thrilled she could take a break from her government job or whatever it is to join us tonight." Laughter again, sharper this time. My father, sitting 2 tables away, chuckled along. Of course he did. He always laughed at Cynthia's jokes, even when the punchline was me. I stared at the tablecloth, feeling the sound around me blur into a low, steady hum. The years I'd spent building rank, leading men under fire, earning respect, none of it mattered here. In this room, I was still the plain Dalton girl who never quite fit in. Cynthia wasn't finished. She raised her glass toward me. We all have our strengths. I organize events, Lucas builds houses, and Amelia, well, she fixes things, I guess. That's what soldiers do, right? Fix things? A few people laughed again, unsure if they were supposed to. That's the thing about polite society: they'll join cruelty if it's dressed well, and said with a smile. Across the room, Turner shifted slightly. His jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. The others followed his lead. They were reading the room the same way they used to read a battlefield, calculating timing, distance, risk. I forced a smile, lifted my water glass, and gave a small nod. "To family," I said, my voice steady. Cynthia grinned, thinking she'd won. The rest of the evening crawled forward. The couple danced, people cheered, cameras flashed. I stayed at my table, answering small talk from strangers who didn't care about my answers. My sister glided from group to group, glowing in attention. She had no idea that every word she'd said had landed like shrapnel, small, invisible cuts that only the target can feel. Then came the second round of toasts. Lucas thanked everyone. Nora's father gave a long speech about values and tradition. And then someone handed the mic to Cynthia again. Because of course they did. She wasn't drunk, but she was enjoying herself too much. Before we end, I just want to say, she began, pausing dramatically. Growing up, I always had to be the pretty one, because someone had to balance things out, right, Em? A few people gasped quietly, but most just laughed again because laughter is safer than silence. And that's when I felt the shift. I saw Turner glance at Briggs. Diaz set down his glass. Porter leaned forward, eyes on me. The same silent coordination I'd seen in 100 patrols was back, right there between the wedding centerpieces. My heart didn't race, it slowed. Every instinct told me something was about to change. Cynthia took a sip of wine, smirking at me across the table. "Don't look so serious," she teased. "It's just a joke. You know I love you." Turner's voice cut through the noise. Calm, steady, unmistakable. "Ma'am." The room went quiet. Briggs, Diaz, and Porter joined in, all four voices in unison. "She's our commanding officer." Every fork froze mid-air. A waiter stopped pouring wine. Someone gasped loud enough for the sound to echo. Cynthia's smile vanished. She choked on her wine, sputtering as a few drops hit the white tablecloth. "What?" she croaked, voice cracking. Turner didn't move. "With respect, ma'am led us overseas. She's the reason half of us are here tonight." Cynthia's face turned pale. The laughter, the judgment, the superiority, it drained out of her like someone had pulled the plug. Around us, whispers started. "Commanding officer? She's military? Major Dalton?" I didn't stand up. I didn't need to. I looked at Turner and gave the smallest nod. "At ease, gentlemen." They sat down, silent again. Mission complete. Across the table, Cynthia dabbed her mouth with a napkin, trying to find her voice. But there was nothing left to say. The music had stopped. Even the band was frozen. I reached for my glass and took a slow sip, calm and unbothered. For the first time that night, the room finally felt quiet enough to breathe. And just like that, the spotlight wasn't hers anymore. The room was still quiet when I walked out of the ballroom. My shoes clicked softly against the marble hallway, echoing in a rhythm that sounded steadier than I felt. The air outside smelled of garden roses and cold night cleaner, easier to breathe. Funny how silence could feel heavier than noise. That kind of silence had been my soundtrack since childhood. Back in Cloverfield, Tennessee, the Dalton house sat behind my father's auto repair shop, a place that smelled like grease, burnt coffee, and rust. I used to love watching him work when I was little. He'd fix engines like a surgeon, tools laid out in perfect order. But when he looked at me, there was always that tiny pause, that flicker that said I didn't quite belong there. "You're built strong," he'd say, wiping his hands on a rag. "Not like your sister. She's the delicate one." And Cynthia was delicate, all right. Delicate like a glass knife. She was the kind of girl who could walk into any room and have everyone wrapped around her in 5 minutes. Teachers adored her. Neighbors spoiled her. At church, even the preacher smiled wider when she sang. I used to stand next to her in the pew, watching sunlight hit her perfect curls while my hair frizzed no matter how much I brushed it. Dad loved to introduce us as my pretty one and my practical one. It was supposed to sound balanced, but I knew which label came with a ribbon and which came with a wrench. I tried to earn his approval the way I thought he understood by working. I'd hand him tools before he asked, clean the shop floor, balance his ledgers. But no matter what I did, it never turned into praise. He'd grunt something like, "That'll do," and move on. When Cynthia aced a spelling test, though, he'd take her out for ice cream like she'd won the Nobel Prize. Mom tried to soften it. "He means well," she'd whisper when he wasn't looking. "He just doesn't know how to say it." "Then maybe he shouldn't say anything," I once muttered. She didn't disagree. At school, things weren't much different. Cynthia was prom queen before she hit 17. I was the Dalton sister who runs track. Not fast enough to be impressive, not popular enough to be invited anywhere. I learned early that invisibility was safer than attention. Still, there were moments small, almost forgettable ones that chipped away slowly. Like the time in 10th grade when Cynthia showed up at the field with her friends just to watch me run. I heard them laughing near the bleachers. "She moves like a tank," one said. Cynthia laughed first. I finished the lap, head down, pretending the wind was louder than their voices. Dad thought jokes like that were harmless. "It's just teasing," he'd say. "Toughen up." But that kind of teasing builds layers. One day, you wake up and realize you've built armor you can't take off. The day Mom died was the last time I saw any of us try to act like a family. She'd had a weak heart for years, but no one thought it would happen so fast. The house filled with casseroles and quiet pity. At the funeral, Cynthia cried with the kind of grace that photographs well. I stood next to her, dry-eyed and shaking inside. Dad barely looked at me. He just stood there like a man waiting for the service to end so he could get back to his workbench. That night, when everyone had left, I found him sitting in the garage, staring at the floor. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't look up. "You should lose some weight, Em. It's not healthy." I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out. Something snapped in me that night, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet break, like a wire finally stretched too far. The next morning, I walked into the recruiting office in town. The sergeant behind the desk looked me over and said, "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure," I told him. Boot camp was hell, but it was an honest kind of hell. The rules were clear, the insults came with purpose, and if you earned respect, it stuck. I could handle that. For the first time in my life, I was measured by effort, not appearance. Every blister, every push-up, every mile on that track felt like I was erasing someone else's voice from my head. The letters from home were short and predictable. Cynthia wrote once, saying she was proud I found something to keep me busy. Dad's note just said, "Don't do anything stupid." I kept them both folded in my locker, as a reminder not of love, but of why I had to get out. Years later, after deployments, promotions, and the kind of nights that rewrite who you are, I came back for one Christmas. Cynthia had just gotten engaged to some guy in real estate. The table looked like a magazine ad, white linens, perfect napkins, candlelight. I wore my uniform because I came straight from base. Dad looked me up and down. "Didn't know they let women make it that far," he said. Cynthia chimed in, smiling sweetly. "Well, they probably needed some diversity." I smiled back. "Yeah, they do, especially in leadership." Dinner went silent for about 10 seconds. Then Dad changed the subject to football. That was the last holiday I bothered coming home. The next few years were a blur of missions, transfers, and paperwork. I stopped calling, stopped trying. It's strange how easy it gets to live without people who never saw you clearly in the first place. Then one spring morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. "Getting married in June. Hope you'll come." I stared at it for a long time. For a second, I thought about saying no. But Lucas was the only one in that family who ever looked at me like I was more than a problem to manage. He used to visit me at base when I was near DC, always asking questions about the Army like a kid who still believed in heroes. So I said yes. When I showed up at the wedding rehearsal, Cynthia looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon. She hugged me with the kind of stiffness you reserve for tax auditors. "Wow, the uniform suits you," she said, then turned to the planner. "We'll need to seat her somewhere." Quiet. That was Cynthia in one sentence, always worried about appearances, always terrified someone else might draw attention away from her. I could have skipped the wedding entirely, but I didn't. Not because I wanted revenge or closure or any of that movie nonsense. I just wanted to stand there, unbothered, while she ran her perfect show. And that's how I ended up under a chandelier, surrounded by people who laughed on command, pretending that family means the same thing as love. Maybe that's what families do best, they rehearse. They practice the performance until they almost believe it. But truth doesn't need rehearsal. It just needs the right moment to stand up. The first morning of boot camp smelled like sweat, metal, and cheap coffee. I remember thinking it wasn't that different from my dad's garage. Except this place fixed people instead of engines. The drill sergeant's voice cut through the dawn like a saw blade, and 20 of us scrambled to attention before we even knew what was happening. "Dalton!" he barked when he got to my row. "You think you can survive this?" "Yes, Sergeant. You better, because I don't do refunds." He moved on, and I caught a few recruits snickering under their breath. It didn't bother me. After years of Cynthia's digs and Dad's jokes, a few insults from strangers barely registered. At least here, the playing field was even. No one cared what you looked like, only if you could keep up. The first week was hell. My arms shook from push-ups, my lungs burned like fire, and I learned that blisters could have personalities. Every morning felt like waking up inside a punishment. But there was a strange kind of freedom in it too. No one asked me to smile, or to be ladylike, or to make myself smaller. They just yelled, and you did what you were told, and if you didn't quit, you earned a tiny slice of respect. I wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but I was stubborn. Stubborn gets you far in the army. I learned to shine boots until they could blind a man, fold hospital corners so sharp you could lose a finger, and march until the rhythm got baked into my bones. Somewhere in that grind, I started feeling something new steady. Private Turner was one of the first to notice. "You don't talk much," he said one night while we cleaned rifles. "Waste of breath," I replied. He grinned. "You sound like you've done this before." "In a way," I said. "Just different uniforms." By the third month, the sergeants had stopped yelling quite as much. They only yelled when they saw potential. That's how I knew I was doing fine. When graduation day came, I stood in line with my unit, watching families wave from the bleachers. My father wasn't there. He'd sent a note through Cynthia. "We're proud, but we're busy." The words felt mechanical, like something he copied from a greeting card. I folded the note and put it in my pocket, right next to the dog tags that finally had my name on them. My first deployment came faster than expected. Iraq, 2006. The desert heat could melt resolve, and the wind carried sand that felt like it had a grudge. I was assigned to logistics, moving supplies, coordinating convoys, making sure the right equipment got to the right place on time. It sounded simple on paper. In practice, it was a daily balancing act between chaos and control. There were nights when we worked by red flashlight, trucks rumbling through the dark like restless animals. Every mile outside the wire felt like flipping a coin. You learn to measure time differently in places like that, not by hours, but by who makes it back. Turner ended up in my unit. So did Diaz, Briggs, and later Porter. None of us talked about fear. We just worked, cursed, and kept moving. I became the person who double-checked every route, every manifest, every radio frequency. The others called it obsessive. I called it survival. One afternoon, a convoy got ambushed outside Fallujah. The radio chatter turned to static, and my stomach dropped. I was in command that day. Protocol said stay put and wait for orders, but I'd seen too many orders arrive too late. I grabbed my gear, jumped in the lead Humvee, and drove. When we found them, 2 trucks were on fire. The air smelled like diesel and dust and something worse. Turner was pinned under a wheel well, shouting through the smoke. I crawled through the wreckage, grabbed him by the vest, and pulled until the sound of metal gave way. My hands shook, but they didn't stop. We got everyone out. 3 wounded, no deaths. By Army math, that was a win. When I filed the report that night, I left out half the story. I didn't mention the moment I thought we'd all die. I didn't mention that the only thing I could think of while dragging Turner was how my father used to say, "You're not built for hard work." Command called me resourceful. My team called me ma'am, with a mix of respect and relief. The only thing I called myself was tired. A few weeks later, Turner came by with his arm in a sling. "You saved my life," he said. I shrugged. "You would have done the same." "Yeah," he said, "but you did it first." That night, I sat on a supply crate, staring out over the base. The sun bled orange across the horizon, and for once, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. The Army kept me moving Afghanistan next, then Germany, then a brief stint in D.C. I learned more about leadership than any manual could teach. You can't fake calm when 20 people are looking at you for it. You can't order trust, you have to earn it one decision at a time. I got promoted, then promoted again. Major Dalton, then Lieutenant Colonel. Every new rank came with another ceremony, another photo, another handshake from someone who'd forget my name by the next day. Still, it mattered, not because of the medals, but because I'd built something no one could take credit for but me. The years blurred into a rhythm: deploy, return, train, repeat. Somewhere in that loop, I stopped checking social media, stopped answering Cynthia's occasional texts, stopped caring whether my father's shop was still open. The last picture I saw of them was at some charity gala. Cynthia in a red dress, Dad in a rented tux, smiling like they'd both won something. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just done. Then came the email that changed everything. New assignment. Fort Ashland, Virginia. It wasn't glamorous, but it was close to home. Close enough that I couldn't pretend the past was on another planet anymore. My first week there, I ran into an old family friend at the commissary. He told me Cynthia was doing well, running her own event planning company, married into money, of course. He also mentioned Lucas engaged, big wedding planned, whole town invited. The timing felt like the universe setting up a test I didn't sign up for. When the invitation arrived, gold edges and all, I laughed out loud. It looked like something straight out of Cynthia's taste, expensive, but hollow. The RSVP line stared back at me for a long time. I could have checked regretfully decline and gone on with my life, but I didn't. I checked accept. Not out of revenge, not even curiosity, just because sometimes you have to walk back into the fire to prove it doesn't burn you anymore. A week before the wedding, I pulled my uniform out of the closet. Not to wear it, just to look at it. The metals caught the light from the window, glinting in small, quiet ways. I thought about how my father used to mock me for sweating in his garage, how Cynthia used to laugh at my haircut, how every joke was another reminder to shrink. And all I could think was, thank God they underestimated me. There's a certain sound the desert makes at night. Not silence, exactly, more like the hum of something that never really sleeps. Engines, distant gunfire, a radio crackling somewhere with half a voice. After a while, you stop noticing the noise because it becomes part of you, like the weight of the vest on your shoulders or the grit that never leaves your teeth. In Afghanistan, time didn't pass, it just repeated itself in different temperatures. Mornings started with dust storms and ended with reports that no one wanted to read. By then, I'd been in long enough to understand that calm was just the space between bad days. Our unit was stationed at a forward operating base, tucked between two mountains. We were responsible for supply routes, food, ammo, medkits, anything that kept the others alive long enough to do their jobs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. Logistics isn't sexy, but it's the backbone of survival. Turner was my right hand. He had that Tennessee drawl that made orders sound like suggestions, but when the time came, he moved faster than anyone else. Diaz kept things light, Briggs handled maps, and Porter was the one who always prayed before we rolled out. A mismatched bunch, but solid. One morning, Command ordered a run through Coast Province. Routine, they said. Just another convoy. But routine in that part of the world meant pray nothing explodes. We had 4 trucks loaded with supplies and an escort vehicle up front. I was in the second Humvee, radio in hand, scanning the ridgelines as we crawled down a dirt road that looked like it had been drawn by a drunk with a pencil. About 20 minutes in, the first explosion hit. The shockwave slammed through the Humvee like a sledgehammer. My helmet cracked against the frame, my ears rang, and for a second, all I could hear was static. The lead vehicle was on fire, black smoke curling into the sky. Someone yelled, IED, and everything turned into chaos. Training takes over when fear wants to run the show. I grabbed the radio, barked coordinates, and climbed out before anyone could stop me. Turner followed, weapon up, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Rounds started snapping overhead. It's a sound you never forget, the sharp, ugly whine of metal cutting air too close to your face. Get the driver, I shouted. He was slumped over the wheel, blood running down his neck. Turner dragged him out while I covered the right flank. The sand kicked up around my boots as bullets hit nearby. Diaz was yelling into the mic for backup. Briggs was already setting up a perimeter. Everything happened fast, but inside my head it felt slow, every breath measured. We managed to pull everyone back, patch up the wounded, and hold position until the escort team arrived. When the dust finally cleared, 1 truck was gone, but everyone was alive. Command called it a successful recovery. I called it Tuesday. That night, I sat outside the medic tent watching the stars. My uniform was stiff with dirt and dried sweat. Turner came over with a canteen and handed it to me. You ever get used to this? He asked. No, I said. But you get better at pretending. He laughed quietly. Guess that's something. Know. A few days later, they told me I was being recommended for commendation. I didn't even ask which one. Awards felt weird. You don't want a medal that reminds you of the day you almost lost everyone. What mattered was the look on my team's faces, the silent nods, the unspoken trust. They'd follow me again, and that meant more than any ceremony. When we finally rotated stateside, the base felt too quiet. People back home asked polite questions like, "Was it scary?" or "Did you see action?" Like war was a movie they'd half-watched. I learned to answer with half-truths. It was busy. We did our job. The truth is, coming home was harder than going to war. Over there, I knew what my purpose was. Here, everything was blurry. Civilians rushed around with coffee cups, arguing over nonsense, while my head was still in coast. Every loud noise made me flinch. Every silence made me tense. I tried to blend in. I wore jeans instead of fatigues, ordered lattes like everyone else, smiled when people said thank you for your service. Inside, I just wanted quiet, the kind that didn't hum with memories. After a few months, I got transferred to a training base in Texas. I taught logistics to new recruits, how to plan routes, manage supplies, stay alive. Most of them were kids who'd never been out of their state. They looked at me like I was part ghost, part myth. One of them, a young woman from Minnesota, asked me why I stayed in the army so long. "You could have left," she said. "Started over. Because this is the first place I ever made sense," I told her. The truth came out before I could stop it. And it was true. The army wasn't easy, but it was honest. You worked, you earned, you mattered. That was enough. A few years later, I got word that Turner had transferred to Virginia. He sent me an email. "Ma'am, you ever stop moving long enough to breathe?" I replied, "Only between deployments." We kept in touch. When he told me he'd be a groomsman in Lucas's wedding, I almost laughed. Small world. I didn't tell him Lucas was my brother. He didn't tell me Cynthia was running the show. Maybe we both knew it would be more interesting that way. By then, I'd made peace with my past, or at least buried it deep enough to function. But it's funny how life waits until you think you're steady before it yanks the rug out. The night before I flew out for the wedding, I sat in my apartment ironing my one decent dress. Old habits die hard. The fabric smelled faintly of starch and lavender. I looked at the medals in my shadow box one last time, their ribbons faded from years of sunlight. Each one told a story I didn't plan to share. Not because I was humble, but because some stories lose their meaning when you try to make them fit small talk. I packed the dress, locked the door, and drove toward the airport before dawn. The radio played old country songs about home and forgiveness. I didn't sing along. At the terminal, an older woman noticed the military tag on my bag and smiled. "My son served too," she said. "He always said the hardest part was coming back." I nodded. "He's right. Jesus." The flight was smooth, the sky clear. Somewhere between Dallas and Richmond, I caught myself staring out the window, watching clouds slide beneath the wing. It felt strange heading toward the place I'd run from most of my life. Still, there was no dread this time. Just an odd calm, like I'd finally learned that some battles aren't meant to be won, they're meant to be finished. The smell of wet pavement hit me first when I stepped out of the rental car. Cloverfield hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same faded signs, same air of a town trying to remember who it used to be. The Dalton garage still stood behind the house, its paint peeling like sunburned skin. The old sign, Harold Dalton Auto Repairs, hung crooked, as if gravity had finally gotten tired of being patient. I didn't knock when I walked in. Dad was sitting on his usual stool, hunched over a carburetor, cigarette dangling from his mouth even though he'd promised Mom he'd quit 15 years ago. He looked up, squinting like the light was too bright. "Well," he said, "look what the sand blew back." "Good to see you too," I said, setting my bag down. He grunted, wiped his hands on a rag, and nodded toward the workbench. "You still remember how to tighten a socket?" "I remember," I said. I picked up a wrench and started helping like no time had passed at all. That was our version of a greeting, no hugs, just work. He'd never been comfortable with emotion. Fixing things was the only language he spoke fluently. After a few minutes, he asked, "You gonna wear that fancy uniform to the wedding?" I kept my eyes on the engine. "No, just a dress." "Good," he said. "No need to make a spectacle." I bit back the obvious reply. The irony of him warning me not to draw attention when Cynthia had built her whole life around being seen wasn't lost on me. When I left the garage, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The same floral wallpaper Mom loved was still there, faded, and peeling at the edges. Her photo hung above the mantel, catching the afternoon light. I paused in front of it. "You'd hate what we've become," I whispered. The rehearsal dinner was that night. I drove to the venue, some massive country club outside Richmond that probably charged extra for breathing near their golf course. The kind of place that smelled like money and old furniture polish. When I walked into the ballroom, Cynthia spotted me immediately. Her posture stiffened like someone had just handed her a live grenade. Then, in true Cynthia fashion, she plastered on a grin and swept toward me. She said, voice dripping with the fake warmth she saves for her Christmas cards. "You made it. Oh my gosh, you look simple, refreshing." I gave her a polite smile. "Thanks. You look expensive." Her laugh faltered for half a second. "Well, you know me, always trying to make things perfect." She wasn't lying. The room was spotless, every chair lined up with military precision, every napkin folded like origami. She probably threatened the florist into crying at least twice to get those centerpieces right. Lucas came over then, saving us both. He hugged me hard, the kind of hug that doesn't care who's watching. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "Wouldn't miss it." He smiled. "Sin's been working on this for months." "I can tell," I said, glancing at her clipboard. Nora, his fiancée, joined us. She had that effortless kindness you don't see much anymore. "We're so honored you came, Major Dalton," she said. "Just Emilia tonight," I told her. "No ranks at family events." Cynthia smirked. "Good, because the only uniform allowed here is a tux." I let it slide. Arguing with her was like trying to wrestle fog, it just makes you look crazy. Dinner went smoothly, mostly because I kept to myself. People at my table made small talk about golf courses, vacation homes, and things that cost more than my truck. I didn't fit in, but I'd stopped trying a long time ago. Halfway through dessert, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Ma'am?" I turned. Turner stood there, clean-shaven, in a tux that didn't quite hide the soldier underneath. Behind him were Diaz, Briggs, and Porter, my old team. For a second, the noise of the room faded out. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. "Groomsmen," Turner said with a grin. "Didn't realize the groom was your brother until this week." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think to warn me? Would have ruined the surprise." We shook hands, professional but warm. Porter added, "We're off duty, ma'am. We'll keep it that way." "Appreciate it," I said. Cynthia watched from across the room, curiosity written all over her face. She couldn't quite place them, but she knew enough to be uneasy. It was the same look she gave Mom's cat before it scratched her. After dinner, Lucas gathered everyone for a quick toast. Cynthia stood beside him, her perfect smile back in place. "Tomorrow's going to be beautiful," she said. "Everything is exactly how I planned it." She looked at me as she said it. Not accidentally. When the crowd clapped, I noticed the subtle things, the tightness in Cynthia's shoulders, the way her eyes darted between me and the men who'd just spoken to me. She wasn't used to not knowing the script. Later that night, I stood outside near the valet circle, enjoying a few quiet minutes away from the noise. The groomsmen came out, laughing softly. Turner stopped beside me. "She doesn't like you much, huh?" "She's consistent," I said. He chuckled. "You want us to, I don't know, say something if she starts up?" "No," I said. "I can handle her." He nodded. "Figured you'd say that." I appreciated the offer, though. The loyalty. Soldiers have a way of showing up when it counts. On the drive back to my hotel, I passed neighborhoods that used to be fields. Strip malls, chain stores, subdivisions, they'd all sprouted like weeds. Cloverfield had moved on. Maybe it was time I did too. When I parked, I sat in the car for a while, staring at my reflection in the windshield. Not the soldier, not the awkward daughter, just the woman who'd somehow survived both. I thought about Mom's voice, about the way she used to smooth my hair when I was small and whisper, "Don't let them decide who you are." Somehow, I had. For years. I turned off the ignition and leaned back in the seat. The quiet felt good, real. Tomorrow would come, with its flowers and photographers and Cynthia's endless choreography. She'd make her jokes, flash her smile, charm the room like she always did. And I'd be there, calm, steady, invisible until I didn't need to be. The morning of the wedding broke warm and bright, the kind of Virginia sunshine that makes everything look softer than it really is. I woke early, not because I was excited, but because years in the military had turned sleeping in into a myth. The hotel coffee tasted like burnt paper, but it did the job. I ironed my dress until there wasn't a wrinkle left, the habit too ingrained to ignore. It was a simple navy wrap dress, nothing that would steal attention, but something that fit me clean, straightforward, unbothered. The mirror caught my reflection, and for a brief second, I saw the woman I'd become, not the one Cynthia used to describe. I almost smiled. The venue was already buzzing when I arrived. Cars lined the long driveway, valets in black vests moved like clockwork, and photographers were everywhere, orbiting Cynthia like she was a celebrity. The Oakmont Country Club gleamed under the sun, and even from the parking lot, I could smell the roses she'd insisted be shipped from California. Inside, the place was chaos disguised as perfection. Bridesmaids rushed in matching silk robes, hair curlers sparking like weapons, while waiters adjusted champagne glasses by the millimeter. Cynthia stood in the center, headset on, clipboard in hand, directing the whole circus. When she spotted me, her eyes scanned my outfit with that surgical precision she was born with. "You went with blue again," she said, voice smooth as glass. "It's a good color for not caring what people think," I said. She blinked, forced a laugh. "Oh, always the comedian. Anyway, I need you to sit on the groom's side. We're trying to keep the photos symmetrical." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't want to ruin the geometry." Lucas came over before she could respond. His tux fit perfectly, though his expression didn't. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I've been through worse mornings." He chuckled. "I believe that. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I'll give her that. The sun hit the white chairs just right. The string quartet played something expensive, and Nora looked radiant in her dress. When she walked down the aisle, Lucas couldn't take his eyes off her, and for a moment, even I forgot the Dalton family tension simmering under the surface. Cynthia, of course, took credit for everything. She floated up and down the aisle before the ceremony like a general inspecting her troops. Every flower, every ribbon, every seat had her fingerprints on it. You could practically hear her silently begging the universe not to let anything go wrong. When the vows ended and the applause began, she exhaled like she'd just finished a marathon. The photographers swarmed the couple, and she jumped in every other frame, adjusting, smiling, posing like it was her day. I stayed in the back, clapping, unnoticed. It was fine that way. I'd learned that power didn't always come from standing in the spotlight. Sometimes it came from watching quietly, knowing you didn't need it anymore. After the ceremony, we moved inside for the reception. Chandeliers sparkled. A jazz trio played something soft, and servers carried trays of champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. I found my seat, right where Cynthia wanted me, close enough to see her, far enough not to spoil the picture. When the groomsmen walked in, I almost laughed. Turner, Diaz, Briggs, and Porter in tuxedos looked like wolves wearing Sunday suits. The straight backs, sharp eyes, synchronized movements, they hadn't forgotten the rhythm of command. Cynthia didn't recognize them as soldiers. To her, they were just handsome props for the photos. She leaned toward one of her friends and whispered, "Lucas's taste in friends very rugged, don't you think?" Her friend giggled. Turner caught my eye across the room. I gave a subtle nod, our unspoken language. Keep it cool. Stay invisible. Dinner started, and so did the small talk. People discussed business trips, college tuitions, and who wore what designer. It was the kind of conversation where everyone competed to sound humble while bragging. Cynthia thrived in it. She drifted from table to table, touching shoulders, laughing too loudly, telling everyone how she'd personally overseen every last detail. When she stopped by my table, she placed a hand on my shoulder like she was doing charity work. "How's the food? Not too rustic?" "It's good," I said. "A little salty, though. Guess you had a hand in it." "Oh." The guests around us chuckled, unsure whose side they were supposed to be on. Cynthia smiled with her teeth but not her eyes. "Oh, M's still so witty. You should talk more. People might start to like you." "I'll risk it," I said. She straightened, tossed her hair, and walked off to applause from her friends. The room buzzed again, but under the laughter was a quiet discomfort. Even people who enjoyed her act were starting to sense the edge beneath it. The speeches came next. Lucas started short, genuine, sweet. He thanked his friends, his family, his bride. Nora's father followed, long and proud, like every father giving away a daughter he secretly didn't want to. Then, inevitably, it was Cynthia's turn. She didn't need to be asked. She just stood up, microphone in hand, soaking up the attention like sunlight. "I just want to say," she began, "how proud I am of my little brother. And of course, how wonderful it is to have everyone here, especially family, some of whom traveled quite a distance." Her gaze landed on me. "You know," she continued, smiling sweetly, "growing up we were such different sisters. I was the girly one, always playing dress-up. And Amelia, well, she was more practical. Fixing Dad's tools, patching her jeans with duct tape. We all have our talents, right?" A few polite laughs followed. I didn't move. She went on. "But seriously, Em, it's so great you could be here. I mean, between deployments and whatever mysterious things you do for the army." The crowd laughed louder this time. Turner's jaw tightened. Briggs leaned back in his chair, expression neutral but eyes sharp. I looked at Cynthia, smiling, glowing, believing this was still her stage. What she didn't see was how quickly her control was slipping. The room's laughter sounded thinner now, uneasy. People weren't sure if it was okay to laugh. Even Dad shifted uncomfortably at his table. Cynthia lifted her glass, preparing for the final punchline. "Anyway, to Lucas and Nora, may your life together be beautiful, disciplined, and maybe just a little less strict than some people like to make things." The toast got its scattered applause. She curtsied slightly and sat down, self-satisfied. Across the room, Turner caught my eye again. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his expression said everything. "Say the word." I gave the slightest shake of my head. "Not yet." Cynthia's laughter still rang faintly as the next song started, and guests began to drift toward the dance floor. But there was a shift in the air, a current only the observant could feel. The same kind of stillness right before something breaks. The music faded, but the echo of Cynthia's voice lingered like a bad perfume. You could feel the tension ripple through the tables, half the guests pretending not to notice, the other half watching me for a reaction. I gave them nothing. Years in the military had taught me that silence has more power than outrage ever could. Cynthia, on the other hand, thrived on spectacle. Once she realized I wasn't taking her bait, she doubled down. That's what she always did. She'd keep picking until someone bled. "Don't be such a statue, Em," she called across the table, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm only joking. You do know how to take a joke, right?" I looked up slowly, met her eyes, and smiled. Of course. I learned from the best. A few people laughed nervously. The sound was short, uncertain, like a fuse sputtering before it burns out. She blinked, taken aback that I'd said anything at all. "Oh well, good. I was worried the army made you too serious." Turner shifted slightly in his seat, his hand tapping a slow rhythm on the table. He wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed watching disrespect, especially in uniform or out of it. But I caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of my head. "Stand down." The DJ filled the silence with a soft tune, something jazzy and harmless, the kind of song meant to glue the cracks in awkward moments. It didn't work. The air in the room felt heavier than before. Cynthia laughed again, forced now, brittle around the edges. She whispered something to her husband, who nodded like a trained actor, and then she raised her glass for another toast she hadn't been asked to make. "I just have to say," she began, "how incredible it is that we can all come together like this. Family means so much to me, even when we don't always see eye to eye." Her gaze flicked to me, deliberate as a knife. "When we were little," she continued, "Amelia used to fix Dad's tools, patch up his trucks. She was always such a helper. I remember once she tried to fix my dolls too, took them apart with a screwdriver. Said she was improving them." End of fur. The guests laughed politely, relieved to have something safe to laugh at. "I guess some things never change," she added, smiling at me. "She's still fixing things. People, engines, who knows? We all have our callings." I took a sip of water, calm. The glass didn't shake. Inside, a small part of me almost pitied her. She was working so hard to prove something to who, I wasn't even sure anymore. When she sat down, the laughter faded quickly. It wasn't cruel laughter this time, just tired. People were starting to notice the pattern. You can only humiliate someone so long before it starts making you look bad. The band struck up another song, and Lucas stepped forward to thank the guests again. His voice was steady but tight, like he was trying to smooth over the cracks without drawing attention to them. "Let's enjoy the night," he said, smiling toward Nora. "It's about love, not speeches." I caught his eye across the room and gave him a nod, small, reassuring. He looked grateful. For the next hour, I stayed quiet, talked when spoken to, smiled when necessary, helped an elderly aunt find her seat. I was almost invisible again, and that suited me fine. But Cynthia couldn't leave it alone. She never could. Later, when the dancing started, she found me near the dessert table, balancing a plate of cake, like I'd committed some social crime. "You're not dancing?" she asked, the sweetness in her tone so fake it could have been sold by the pound. "Not my thing," I said. "Oh, come on. Live a little. You're so stiff." She leaned closer, her breath smelling of Chardonnay. "No wonder you never married. Men don't like women who look like they're inspecting the troops." I smiled again. Guess I never met one worth standing at attention for. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might drop the mask entirely. But then she laughed. Too loud, as if she could drown in her own performance. Lucas walked by just in time to hear her laugh. He frowned. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said. "Your sister's just keeping me entertained." He hesitated, looked between us, and nodded slowly. "All right. Don't let her work you too hard, Sin." "I'm just having fun," she said, her tone sugary again. When he left, she leaned in close. "You really think you're better than us, don't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The question said more about her than any answer could. Her eyes narrowed. "You walk around like some kind of hero. You fix trucks, fight wars, wear your little medals, but at the end of the day, you're still that same awkward girl hiding behind Dad's tools, just better dressed." I looked her dead in the eye. "You finished?" She blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you were finished. You've been rehearsing this speech your whole life. I figured it might take a while." For a split second, I saw something behind her eyes, a flicker of doubt, or maybe fear. But she recovered quickly, smiled again, and turned to grab another drink. "Enjoy the party, Major," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't be late for inspection." As she walked away, a few guests nearby glanced at me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give them one. Turner appeared beside me, out of nowhere like he always used to during missions. "She's pushing it," he muttered quietly. "She's always pushed it," I said. "You want me to shut it down?" "No. Let her finish the show. Everyone's watching now." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Copy that." The rest of the night blurred into music and movement. People danced, drank, and pretended the earlier tension had vanished, but it hadn't. You could feel it lingering just beneath the polished surface of every smile. Every time Cynthia passed by, the groomsmen's eyes followed her not with malice, but with the kind of awareness that comes from men who've spent too long reading danger. She didn't notice. She never noticed anything outside her reflection. I sat quietly, watching her make her rounds, laughing, posing, soaking up attention that was starting to slip through her fingers. She was too drunk to realize she was performing for an audience that had already stopped clapping. At one point, she stumbled near the dance floor, nearly tripping over her own heels. Porter reached out and caught her elbow before she fell. She laughed, flushed, and said, "Oh, you're stronger than you look." He smiled politely. "Ma'am, that's my job." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Why do you sound like you're in the army?" He just smiled again and walked away. She looked after him, confused. Then she looked back at me, eyes narrowing like she was piecing something together. The band changed songs, couples swaying under the dim lights, laughter mixing with the clink of glasses. I leaned back in my chair, calm, watching her confusion settle in. It was the first time all night Cynthia looked unsure of herself. And that uncertainty, small as it was, felt like the beginning of something shifting in the room. The song shifted into a slower tempo, that sentimental kind of tune weddings love to milk for tears. Cynthia was still gliding around the tables, half drunk on praise, half fueled by ego. I watched her fix a flower centerpiece that didn't need fixing, then whisper something to one of the bridesmaids, who giggled on command. She was always best at keeping people orbiting her. Turner was near the bar, watching the room the same way he used to watch a perimeter. Quiet, scanning, patient. Briggs and Diaz stood together near the doors, the kind of stillness that draws more attention than movement. Porter was helping the band with a mic issue, probably pretending not to notice the tension building again. Cynthia called out from the mic stand near the dance floor. "All right, everyone, one more toast before we get this party started for real." A few guests groaned softly, tired of speeches, but she didn't notice. She was too in love with her own voice. "I just have to say," she started, her tone all faux sincerity, "family means the world to me, even when we have our little differences." She gave a small laugh and looked at me like it was an inside joke only she got. "Not everyone gets to be the glamorous one or the successful one," she continued. "But hey, we all contribute in our own ways." Someone near the back muttered, "Jesus again?" But she kept going. "My sister here, Amelia, has always been, well, let's say unique. While I was learning ballet, she was learning how to rebuild engines. While I planned parties, she paused dramatically, searching for a punchline. Whatever people do in the army. There was polite laughter, though weaker than before. Even her closest friends were starting to shift uncomfortably. I sat there, hands folded neatly on the table, breathing slow and steady, my face calm, my pulse calm. She had no idea that silence can be louder than shouting. "Anyway," she went on, "we're all proud of her, of course. Serving our country and all that. I mean, it's not something I could do. I'd never last without good coffee or a hairdryer." The room gave her the laughter she wanted, but it sounded off like people were laughing because they thought they were supposed to. That's when Turner set down his drink. The sound of the glass hitting the table was soft, but it carried. Diaz noticed, straightened his jacket. Briggs adjusted his cufflinks, the subtle signal we used to share before briefings. I met Turner's eyes. One look was all it took. The same wordless language that had saved lives before would do just fine here. He stood up slowly, deliberate. The conversation around our table dimmed, then stopped entirely. He didn't need a microphone. His voice was clear, firm, and carried across the room like a command. "With all due respect," he said, "Ma'am is our commanding officer." The air cracked. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Diaz stood next. "Major Dalton, sir." He gave a crisp salute. Then Briggs and Porter followed, their movements sharp and synchronized, the sound of 4 hands striking their brows echoing louder than any applause. The room froze. The band stopped mid-note. Someone dropped a fork. Cynthia blinked, wineglass halfway to her lips. What did you say?" Turner didn't blink. "Ma'am is Major Amelia Dalton, U.S. Army Logistics Command. Served with distinction in Afghanistan and Iraq." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Words like major, commanding officer, and Afghanistan bounced between tables. Cynthia's smile faltered. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hand trembled just enough that the wine tipped and spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. Lucas stood, confused and half-stunned. "Wait, what?" Turner kept his eyes on me. "Permission to stand down, ma'am?" I nodded once. "At ease, gentlemen." They dropped their salutes and resumed their seats like nothing unusual had happened. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was electric. You could feel the shift, like the entire room had just realized they'd been watching the wrong movie. Someone whispered, "She's the one from that base news story." And someone else hissed, "Did you know she was in the army?" Cynthia tried to recover, laughing weakly. "Oh, come on, that's... But her voice cracked mid-sentence. She looked at me, searching for the smirk, the smugness, the satisfaction she expected. It wasn't there. I just sat still, calm as stone. "It's true," I said evenly. "But please, finish your toast." That line hit harder than anything I could have planned. A few people chuckled, nervous and unsure whose side they were on. Cynthia stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe for the first time in her life, she realized I had a world she'd never been invited into, a world that didn't revolve around her approval. She set the mic down carefully and took a step back. The room was watching her now, but not in admiration, in discomfort. Lucas came around the table, expression caught somewhere between shock and pride. "Major?" he said softly. "Long story," I answered. He shook his head, half smiling. You should have told me. Didn't seem relevant until now. Cynthia sat down, her face pale. For once, she had no clever line, no way to turn it back on me. The DJ, poor guy, tried to restart the music, but even that sounded hesitant, like the speakers knew better. The guests began murmuring, their conversations full of sudden awe. Turner leaned over slightly. You okay? I'm fine, I said. And I meant it. Cynthia kept glancing around, probably praying someone would laugh, someone would pull her out of the spotlight, but no one did. Even Dad was silent, his jaw set in a way that said he finally understood what he'd ignored all these years. After a minute, Nora stood up. I think, she said with calm authority, we should all raise a glass to Major Dalton for serving our country and showing us what real strength looks like. That broke the tension. Guests clapped, some stood, and for the first time that night, the applause wasn't for Cynthia. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I didn't even smile. I lifted my glass once, a small nod, acknowledgement enough. Across the table, Cynthia's eyes met mine. There was no hatred there, just shock, confusion, and something new that looked a lot like shame. The applause faded, replaced by soft conversation. People started to dance again. Slower this time, more genuine. The band found its rhythm, and the evening began to breathe again. I sat back, letting the noise wash over me. For the first time all night, I didn't feel out of place. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like someone's punchline. Cynthia stood and quietly left the table, her heels clicking across the floor. No one followed her. No one even turned to look. The groomsmen stayed seated, glasses raised slightly in silent acknowledgement. Turner caught my eye again, his expression unreadable but proud. The music swelled, lights dimmed, and the chatter returned. Guests smiled, laughed, and pretended they hadn't just witnessed something raw and unforgettable. But under all of it, the clinking glasses, the polite chatter, the sound of Nora's laughter, there was a new kind of silence. Not the awkward kind, the honest kind. The kind that comes when the truth finally walks into the room and everyone knows there's nothing left to say. The next song started, some upbeat pop hit meant to lighten the mood. But it didn't land the same. People were still processing what had just happened. You could see it in the way guests whispered to each other, eyes darting between me and Cynthia, like they were trying to rewrite the script in their heads. I stayed seated, my expression neutral, sipping water while the sound of clinking glasses tried to mask the tension. I'd seen soldiers react better to explosions than this crowd did to honesty. Across the room, Cynthia hovered near the exit, pretending to be on her phone. Her shoulders were stiff, her posture off. She'd never learned how to shrink gracefully. When the spotlight turned harsh, she froze instead of adapting. Lucas was the first to break through the awkwardness. He came up to me, smiling an honest, unguarded smile that looked nothing like the one he wore for photos. So, Major, huh? He said quietly. I gave a small shrug. That's what they tell me. He laughed, shaking his head. You could have warned us. I could have, I said. But then you'd have treated me differently. He nodded, the realization landing slowly. You're right. Nora joined us a moment later, her hand slipping around Lucas's arm. She looked at me the same way someone looks at a sunrise they didn't expect, curious, warm, a little awed. You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen, she said. I've had practice, I replied. Cynthia won't forget this, she said softly, not as a threat, more like an observation. I don't need her to forget, I said. I just need her to stop pretending I don't exist. Nora nodded, her gaze lingering a second longer before someone called her over to the dance floor. Lucas gave me a small, respectful salute before following her. It wasn't mocking. It was recognition. As the night carried on, people started to loosen up again. The wine flowed, the music got louder, and the room began to move like nothing had happened. But everything had. You could feel it in the small ways, the way people glanced at me now, not as a background character, but as someone they'd underestimated. Dad made his way over next. That took me by surprise. He wasn't a man who sought out confrontation unless he thought he could win it. Tonight, he didn't have that look. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, searching for words. Didn't know you were still in uniform, he said finally. I never took it off, I replied. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to process that. You've done well for yourself. I did what I had to. For a moment, it felt like we might actually talk, like he might say the words I'd stopped waiting for years ago. But instead, he cleared his throat and muttered, "Your sister, she didn't mean it like that." I tilted my head. No, she meant it exactly like that. She just didn't think anyone would ever challenge her. He looked down, embarrassed, like a boy caught misbehaving. She gets that from me, he said finally. I didn't argue. Some truths don't need confirmation. He patted my shoulder awkwardly, the same way he used to when I was 10 and he didn't know how to comfort me. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. That's what happens when you stop waiting for someone else to validate you. He nodded again, eyes darting towards Cynthia across the room. She was sitting now, alone, swirling the remains of her wine. For the first time in her life, she looked small. Not physically, just small in spirit. The DJ changed the track again, shifting to something slow and nostalgic. Couples filled the dance floor, swaying under the soft light. Turner approached my table, setting down a fresh glass of water in front of me. That was one hell of a moment, he said. I didn't plan it. I know, he said. That's what made it work. He grinned slightly. You know, you just made every guy in this room rethink how they talk to their sisters. Good, I said. It's about time. He laughed quietly, then leaned closer. Your sister's not the first person to underestimate you. Won't be the last. I'm fine with that, I said. It keeps things interesting. From the corner of my eye, I saw Cynthia stand up and start making her way toward me. Her gait was slower now, deliberate, like someone walking on unfamiliar ground. She stopped at my table, eyes glossy from alcohol and embarrassment. Can we talk? She asked, her voice lower than usual. Turner excused himself without a word. He didn't go far, though just far enough to keep an eye on things. Old habits die hard. Cynthia sat down across from me. She didn't start with an insult or a joke. That alone was new. You could have told me, she said. Would it have mattered? She frowned. Of course it would have. No, I said. You'd have found another way to make me the punchline. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked away for a long moment before whispering, You embarrassed me. I almost laughed, but didn't. No, Cynthia. You embarrassed yourself. You built your whole life on being the smartest person in the room, and for 1 minute someone reminded you that isn't true. She swallowed, eyes glistening. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. I just stopped letting you define what better means. She stared at the tablecloth, her fingers twisting her napkin until it tore. You've always been like this, she said quietly. Distant, cold, hard to love. That's what people say when their love comes with conditions, I replied. She looked up sharply, as if the words stung. I didn't mean, yeah, you did, I said, my voice even. And I'm not angry about it. You are who you are. I spent years trying to earn something from you that you didn't have to give. For the first time all night, she didn't have a comeback. She just sat there, breathing unevenly. After a while, she whispered, I didn't know you'd actually done all that stuff. Commanding people. War zones. Real leadership. I didn't do it for applause. I know, she said, voice trembling slightly. That's probably what makes it worse. That one hit harder than she intended. I didn't answer. The song changed again. Something lighter this time, but the energy in the room had finally leveled. Guests were laughing again. The band sounded confident, and even the waitstaff looked relieved. The storm had passed. Cynthia stood, straightened her dress, and said, I'll see you around. Yeah, I said. You will. She nodded once and walked away, slower this time, but steadier. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it wasn't hatred either. It was the beginning of something quieter, a kind of truce neither of us had ever managed before. I sat back, exhaling, letting the last of the tension drain out of my shoulders. The air felt lighter. My hands finally stopped shaking. Turner returned, handing me a folded napkin with a smirk. You handled that like command school. Command school never covered family. He grinned. Maybe it should. The night rolled on around us, music, laughter, glasses clinking again. No one mentioned ranks, medals, or toasts anymore. Just people trying to enjoy what was left of the evening. It wasn't victory, not in the way movies like to frame it, but it was peace, the kind you earn inch by inch, word by word, until even silence feels like progress. 2 days passed before I saw Cynthia again. The wedding weekend had ended, but the ripples hadn't stopped. The story spread faster than wine stains at a country club. I heard from Lucas that some of the guests couldn't stop talking about the major, who'd just been quietly humiliated and somehow ended up commanding the entire room. By Monday morning, half the town had apparently rewritten the scene in their heads. Some said I'd stood up and made a speech about respect. Others claimed I'd thrown my drink in Cynthia's face. None of it was true, of course, but that's how gossip works. People can't handle quiet dignity, they crave spectacle. When Cynthia called, I didn't answer. When she texted, I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. The kind of done that comes from realizing you don't owe anyone another round of explanations. But by Wednesday, a small part of me wondered if silence was turning into avoidance. That's when she showed up at my house. It was early evening. The light outside was fading, painting the porch gold. I heard her car before I saw it, a smooth hum, expensive, too polished for my gravel driveway. She stepped out in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, hair tied back. For once, she looked like a person instead of a brand. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hey," she said. Her voice was small, unsure. "Hey," I answered just as flat. We stood there in that awkward space between strangers and family, the kind of silence where everything unsaid takes up more room than anything spoken. "Can I come in?" she asked. I thought about saying no, but then I stepped aside. She walked into the living room, scanning the space like she'd never seen it before. It wasn't fancy, clean, practical, a few framed photos from deployments, a flag folded in a case, some old books on a shelf. "This is nice," she said, but it came out hesitant, like she was trying to remember how to talk to me without condescension. "It's home," I said simply. She sat down on the couch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. For a minute, she said nothing. Then finally, "I messed up. That's one way to put it." She nodded. "No. I mean, really. I've been thinking about it nonstop. What I said, how I said it, how I made you feel, it was cruel. It wasn't new," I said, "just public." She winced, but didn't argue. "I didn't realize how much I've been doing it all these years. The jokes, the digs. I thought it was just sibling teasing. It stopped being that when you started doing it for an audience." She looked down, twisting her ring. "I don't know why I do it." "Because it worked," I said. "People laughed. You got attention. I let it slide. It became habit." Her eyes filled, not with theatrical tears, but something quieter, more real. "When they stood up for you like that, it hit me. I've never had anyone do that for me. And I realized, you built something I can't touch. People respect you, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it." "I didn't build it to prove anything to you," I said. "I know," she said softly. "That's why it matters." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, studying her face. "You're not used to being wrong, are you?" She laughed weakly. "No, turns out it's not my best look." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking clock on the mantel and the hum of cicadas outside. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said finally. "Good," I said, "because forgiveness isn't a performance." Her shoulders dropped. "You're still mad." "I'm tired," I corrected. "There's a difference. Anger burns fast, tiredness lingers." She nodded, absorbing that. Then she looked around the room again, her eyes landing on the framed medals and the photo of my unit. "Those guys at the wedding, they really served under you?" "Every one of them," I said. Turner was my operations sergeant. Diaz handled logistics. Briggs and Porter were part of our convoy team. We ran supply lines through Kandahar for 18 months. Cynthia stared at the picture for a long time. "You were in charge of them." "Yeah," I said quietly, "and they trusted me. I don't take that lightly." She turned back to me, her voice soft. "You must have been good at it." "I was," I said, "because I learned early how to keep moving when people underestimated me." "All," she swallowed hard. "Like me." "Like everyone," I said. "But yeah, you helped." Her laugh came out shaky but real. "Well, at least I contributed to something." I smiled faintly. "You did." Something shifted after that, subtle but noticeable. The air stopped feeling sharp. We were two women sitting in a room full of history, finally looking at it instead of pretending it didn't exist. "I don't want us to keep doing this," she said finally. "The fighting, the jabs, the pretending. It's exhausting." "I stopped a long time ago," I said. "You just didn't notice." She nodded. "Then maybe it's my turn." It wasn't an apology, not in the conventional sense, but it was honest. And honesty was more valuable than any polished sorry she could have rehearsed. We sat there a while longer. She told me about Lucas's honeymoon plans, about how the event company had already gotten new clients thanks to the perfect wedding, as people were calling it. I didn't point out the irony. When she got up to leave, she hesitated at the door. "You know, I used to think you were cold," she said. "But now I think you're just careful." "That's not wrong," I said. She nodded. "Well, I'll try to be careful too. Just in a different way." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She smiled once small, sincere, and walked out. As her car pulled away, I stood at the window for a long time. The gravel settled behind her tires, the sound fading until all that was left was the soft hum of evening. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something better, a ceasefire built on honesty instead of guilt. The next morning, I found a card slid under my door. Just plain white, no envelope. Inside, one sentence written in her neat handwriting. "Respect isn't a trophy, it's a choice. I'm learning." I set it on the counter, next to my mug, and smiled. Later that day, Turner called. "You survived the family fallout?" he asked. "Define survive," I said. I chuckled. "You always did prefer quiet victories." "I'll take them," I said. As we hung up, I looked around my kitchen, the same one that had once felt too quiet, and realized something had changed. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable. The kind of silence that means peace doesn't have to be loud to count. Saturday morning came with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The sun crawled through the blinds. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, and for once there wasn't a single thing demanding my attention. No phone calls, no orders, no drama. Just quiet. I sat at the table, mug in hand, watching a bluebird bully a sparrow off the feeder outside. The small one won. I smiled to myself. It felt like a metaphor, but I didn't bother unpacking it. Some things don't need analysis, they just are. The phone buzzed a text from Dad. "Service at the Veterans Memorial today. You coming?" I hadn't planned to. I'd been to enough ceremonies, enough folded flags, and polished speeches to last a lifetime. But something about that message gave me pause. Dad never invited me to those kinds of things. He'd shown up before, sure, but always as a spectator, never as someone who understood. After a minute, I typed back, "Yeah, see you there." The memorial was just a small square of granite between the library and the post office. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. A handful of townspeople had gathered. Boy Scouts, an old Marine in dress blues, a few families holding flags. The air was warm, the kind that makes you remember both summer and loss at the same time. Dad was already there when I arrived. He'd shaved, wore a clean shirt, even left his ball cap in the truck. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. No smile, no words, just that small acknowledgement that said enough. We stood together in the back as the mayor made a short speech about service, sacrifice, and gratitude. It wasn't flowery, which I appreciated, just simple truth told out loud. The Marines saluted, the flag lifted, and for a brief second, you could almost believe the whole town was breathing in unison. When the ceremony ended, people began shaking hands, thanking each other, moving toward the coffee table someone had set up near the gazebo. I started to walk away, but Dad stopped me. "They added new names," he said, nodding toward the wall. "Thought you might want to see." We walked over together. The names were neat, carved clean and deep. People I'd never met, men and women who had carried weight similar to mine. Dad stared at the wall for a long moment. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "I've been mean my whole life." I turned to look at him. He wasn't defensive, just tired, like someone admitting something obvious after years of denial. "You've been afraid," I said. "Mean is just fear wearing boots." He let out a low grunt that might have been a laugh. "You gonna fix me now?" I shook my head. "Can't fix someone who's already trying." We stood there a while longer. He didn't fill the silence this time. That alone felt like progress. When we got back to the parking lot, he reached into his truck and handed me a paper bag. "Tomatoes," he said. "From Johnson's garden. You like those, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Thanks." He nodded, climbed into the driver's seat, and paused before closing the door. "You know," he said, "your sister called me crying last night, said she finally understands what she did." "That's between her and her conscience," I said. He looked at me carefully. "You forgive her?" I thought about it. The wedding, the years before it, the quiet cruelty she used to pass off as humor. And then I thought about her sitting in my living room, stripped of her armor, trying to say the right thing for once in her life. "Yeah," I said. "I do. Doesn't mean I'll forget, but I forgive." He gave a slow nod, the kind that said he respected the answer even if he didn't fully get it. "Guess that's how it starts." "Guess so." End of 4. He closed the door, started the truck, and rolled away down the road, dust rising behind him. That afternoon, I made a BLT with those tomatoes. Best one I'd had in years. While I ate, I thought about the way the wedding had unfolded, how humiliation had turned into revelation, how anger had turned into honesty. Not clean or perfect, but real. Later, I went into town for groceries. At the diner, the waitress slipped me an extra slice of pie on the house. At the hardware store, the owner called me Major for the first time, half proud, half shy. It was strange being seen after so many years of invisibility. Not in the performative way Cynthia loved, but in the quiet acknowledgement of people who finally understood. Respect had arrived late, but it had arrived. That night, Cynthia sent me another message. A photo of Dad standing beside the memorial, hands clasped behind his back. Under it, she'd written, "He told me you taught him something." I didn't reply. Some things don't need a response. Before bed, I sat out on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky, the kind of night where even silence feels like company. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for approval, for apology, for recognition. I'd stopped measuring my worth by what other people noticed. Inside, the folded flag on the shelf caught the light from the porch lamp. I looked at it for a long time, thinking about the men who'd stood up for me without hesitation and the family who'd finally started learning to do the same. Maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but the small, consistent choice to do better. A week later, Dad stopped by again, this time with a jar of homemade pickles. He didn't say much, just set them on the counter and asked if I had salt. We ate standing up, like two people who'd run out of things to fight about. When he left, he held the screen door open so it wouldn't slam. That one small act of consideration meant more than any speech he could have given. Sunday came, and we ended up at church again, same pew, same stained glass light. The pastor talked about mercy, and for once, I didn't tune it out. After the service, someone approached Dad in the parking lot and said, "Heard your girl gave quite a speech at that wedding." And du caught. Dad's chin lifted a little. "She didn't give a speech," he said. "She gave a standard." He didn't look at me when he said it, and he didn't need to. That was his version of pride, rough-edged but genuine. Back home, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. No name, just handwriting I recognized instantly. Inside was a photo of me at the wedding, standing still, glass raised, the light catching me just right. On the back, Cynthia had written, "This is how I'll remember you now." I slipped it beside the photo of my unit on the shelf. The two pictures didn't match in tone or time, but together they made sense. I sat back, tea in hand, and let the day fade. There would be more awkward conversations, more small reconciliations, maybe even more mistakes. But for now, it was enough. The truth had stood on its own that night, and once it does, it doesn't go back into hiding. The greatest revenge had never been the humiliation of that wedding. It was living with dignity afterward, showing every person who ever doubted me that strength can be quiet, honor can be steady, and respect, when it finally comes, doesn't need to shout.